All right, we're recording. Good morning. Hope you're doing well. Today is the 30th of November. This is the Mass Media and Culture course. Media and Mass Culture. Changing the name every time as we go. And I apologize right now for the drilling that you can hear in the background. My neighbors are taking weeks to rebuild their house. I don't know what's going on. I haven't looked, but I can hear them. Now they've stopped. Good. All right, and I hope you're all doing okay in the brave new world that we live in, with new bugs and viruses being announced almost monthly now. Hear the drilling? Okay, so I want to talk today a little bit about science fiction. Basically, science fiction in the context of mass culture, mass media and culture. My question, I suppose, is a bit offbeat. It's an angle that I've been pursuing, and not all studies of science fiction or text about science fiction or even discussion of science fiction needs to go in this form. But I want to ask this question: what can critical theory from the past tell us about popular culture in the future? Or, yeah, and this is maybe a dangerous, not dangerous, but a dubious, questionable path to take because, as we're warned from the beginning of Citizen Kane, no trespassing, don't go back into the past. Psychoanalysis of the past won't help. So what would a psychoanalysis of the future look like, and how do we access the future? Our imagination of the future, of course. And I wonder if there's a place for that there is a place for that but what's the extent of the place for that in sociology? You get what I mean? So here's my set of questions, and a lot of the films I'm going to talk about, of course, are mainstream world, Hollywood meaning, or New York or England, science fiction, popular science fiction on a global level. Of course, there's Vietnamese science fiction, but I don't know it. I've asked you about it. And so a lot of the films that I refer to, you might not know, but in a way, this is a set of recommendations for you to go and find out, or go and watch some great films if you're into them. Some you will know, of course, because no doubt some of you are sci-fi fans, and there's the Sci-Fi Channel and all this, right? But a lot of the stuff we see is, of course, new, and maybe some of the old ones are worth going back to. So hence my recommendation. And in the second half, I want to watch a little bit of something that's real popular culture, the Rocky Horror Picture Show, which is not a horror. Well, it's a little bit of horror, but it's more a comedy, but it's a sci-fi comedy. I want to look a little bit about that. Because I'm interested in science fiction as entertainment, the future thinking as entertainment, part of the entertainment industry, part of the culture industry in a Adorno sense, but also as an escape from everyday culture and as a commodity sold and as escapism, and also something that I don't know, works on our thinking about the future, is kind of works on our anxieties, as horror film does as well, I think, and several different kinds of genres of film work on our anxiety. But in particular, sci-fi is a curious brand of anxiety about the future when it might not have needed it, or maybe it shouldn't have been. Anyway, science fiction is slick and well produced nowadays. When I was a kid growing up, science fiction films, you could see the strings holding up the spaceships, and in some of the great sci-fi films, the spaceships were just hair dryers with some stickers on, or an iron, or something like that. You should check out the film Dark Star, which is fantastic. One of the aliens that terrorize the guys on the ship is a beach ball. I don't know whether it would still be funny. I mean, it's 40 odd years since I've seen it, and you probably have to have smoked a lot of marijuana to find it very funny. And I wouldn't do that. Wouldn't recommend do that, but I do recommend checking out the film. Carpenter, I think. The Rocky Horror Picture Show is a different kettle of fish in that regard. It's also funny, but it's sci-fi, and it's really super popular. And it makes a thing of its props. Like the use of props is a little bit vaudeville, in that sense. The old theatre style of vaudeville and camp and follies, and the kind of cabaret show of I don't know, 1930s Germany is accessed in the Rocky Horror Picture Show, and I want to look at some of that. But there's a real sense in which sci-fi has become the pinnacle of special effects. I mean, besides car chases, sci-fi is special effects, the highest expression of the art of computer-generated cinema. You know, horror show though. I should explain a little bit why it's significant, I suppose. It's the longest running art house film. It was shown like every Friday night for years and years and years in the cinema in the middle of London. And people would go, and the reason to go to the film was as much to see the people watching the film, especially the regulars, as it was to see the film, because they performed parts of the film. For example, the film starts with a wedding scene, and in the audience, then people would throw rice. So it rains early in the film, and people put newspapers over their head and squirt water pistols. And I don't know, you had to be there to find it an experience, but it was really actually a lot of fun. And it ran for, I don't know whether it could still be going, I don't know, but in the Prince Charles Cinema in London, and it ran for years and years and years. Actually, I have no idea whether it still exists. Somebody could look that up. I could look it up now. I don't know what I would look up though. Prince Charles Theatre, Rocky Horror, run. Still seems to be on. Yeah, unbelievable. Still going. Rocky Horror Sing Along, Prince Charles Cinema, TripAdvisor. 16 quid a ticket. That's pretty expensive. £16. That's 500 Namcham Nindo. At least. Yeah, 2016 it was still going. So anyway. You can download the 40th anniversary edition, I think, now. And I've downloaded the 35th anniversary edition. And yeah, it's been running for a long time. Of course, why is the film popular? Because it had a controversial reception. Parents thought it was outrageous, and some, I don't know, maybe some still do, but I doubt it. It's probably problematic for different reasons now because of fake dress-ups and transvestites, and you know, hostile parents, wild kids, that kind of scenario. And it also used some quite innovative staging. You know, there's a sense in which sci-fi film in general has been experimental for cinema as such, but the Rocky Horror Picture Show had its own innovations. angles and cuts and sets and a fantastic tap dancing sequence by Magenta. Anyway, also it integrated music and the hit parade, pop songs and film. The film tie-in was really well exploited in the Rocky Horror Picture Show. So that's a classic example of the mass media and culture tie-in. But there are many others, and they go back a long time. And thinking about space, it's not just in film that people are interested in space, of course. People are interested in real space exploration since, I suppose, going back much further than the 1950s and 1960s, the space race of the 1960s was something huge. I recently saw a map online, which was pretty great, of all the places where there have been sightings of UFOs. And it seems that UFOs prefer to go to America. The majority of you on this map showed it marked with a dot, with a light prick, all the spots in the world where there've been UFO sightings, and there were some in Australia, of course, but the majority were in the US. And it's said, I don't know whether this is true news or not, it said that something like 1 in 9 people in the US believe they have been kidnapped by aliens. Their psychology is such. That's kind of crazy. But I can sort of understand it, because I myself have been in a spaceship. And you may think I'm one of the 9, but I have been in a spaceship. Anyway, I'll explain about that towards the end, because that experience is important. It really changes your worldview. Imagine to be able to step outside of the planet, which very few people have done. Just those of us that have, and even just to imagine yourself outside of the planet was something unusual early on. The first sci-fi books and so on, of course, thought about this. No doubt you can find thoughts about this in literature, old and ancient even literature. But in film, from the very beginning of film, there was thinking about getting off planet, right? Looking up at the sky and thinking, what is there out there? And telling stories about it has always been something that humans have done. And of course, since film is a storytelling medium, its history is bound up also with telling stories about space. George Méliès made a film called Trip to the Moon in 1902. And there were little moon men living in craters, and it was stop motion editing and clunky and so on, but ahead of its time, of course. But then all cinema was ahead of its time in that time. And what was really interesting about it was that already in that 1902 film, it was dealing with problems of imperialism and colonialism. Basically, the scientists in this film, in Trip to the Moon, they create they destroy the tribal inhabitants of the moon who live in these craters with a kind of, it's a genocide. And that's pretty significant that at the time of high point of colonialism, basically the European powers had occupied alien lands, Africa and Asia and so on, and were starting to really bed into being the colonial powers. There have been some anti-colonial resistance, of course, but it was still fledgling. And this film addresses the impact of, I suppose, modern civilization upon a tribal people of another environment. It's the moon, right? So they're aliens, not just other people. In 1927, we have the movie Metropolis by Fritz Lang, and that's a little bit sci-fi, but it's also a very political film. It tells the story of I suppose, a society, and this is really classic, a society where the elite live either above ground or at the top of buildings, in skyscrapers or towers or in penthouses, and at the lowest level, the workers are mass workers. And in this film, time has been changed so that there are no longer 24-hour clocks. It's a 10-hour shift on, 10 hours off, 10 hours on, 10 hours off. And the workers kind of drudge into the factory, and they work like machines, or are worked by the machine. I mean, it's almost as if Fritz Lang was reading Marx's Capital. They're worked by the machine. And then the son of one of the owners of the society that lives up the top builds a perfect robot, the false Maria. And I've asked you to talk about her in the questionnaire, who the false Maria, what her role is, and here's another dimension about the false Maria is it's a sex bot, basically. I mean, it's designed to work, but you can see that there were aspects of this false Maria that served the function of mechanical girlfriend. 1927, it's nearly 100 years ago. We should actually have some sort of celebration of that, and the whole question of robot ethics, which we all get into. It cost 7 million Deutschmark in 1927, which is a lot, and a huge cast of workers. It's something massive and incredible. But I would highly recommend watching Metropolis. It's one of the classics of cinema. It's a spot on the history of thinking about space. Of the future, not space. They don't go into space, but they're thinking robots, which is a big part of science fiction. It's imagine if it was possible to build a robot worker. Of course, that's a relevant issue today because of automation and so on. But I was talking about the spaceship and the space race. Of course, you know about the space race. It begins with Sputnik, my nickname, John Hutnick, right? Sputnik, and Laika, the dog, right? In 1957. So still 30 years after robot, we put a spaceship into orbit with a dog in a tin box. Laika, the dog who died, cooked basically inside that tin box because it had insufficient insulation. It's not even clear that it made it out of the atmosphere because of the insulation, but Sputnik crossed the skies and people could see. They watched it on telescopes, and ham radio operators tuned into the frequency and heard the beep of Sputnik in 1957 and later. And then, of course, the first human to go up into a spaceship was the Soviet astronaut, or cosmonaut, as they're called, Yuri Gagarin. And he's a culture hero. I expect that you've probably seen photos of him. He is very significant. I don't know, the space race, what to say about this kind of displacement of the Cold War into space, of course. John F. Kennedy saying we will land a man on the moon by the end of this decade, and because they were so-called embarrassed by the Soviet Union getting a first man in space and the first woman in space. It took them a long time for America to do anything like that. And so there's a dimension of the Soviet stuff that should be a part of this story, but I'm not. I mean, I've read the texts, but I'm not, like, I haven't done any study of them. But texts like Red Mars and We. There's a Soviet literature on sci-fi that I just want to note as it's a separate field of commentary worth talking about. Now, but I want to bring in how the theoretical material that we're reading in this, and not only this, in other courses with me, the work of Adorno might fit this whole thing about space, because there's really something to be said for thinking, well, I think there's something to be said for thinking through Adorno in the context of sci-fi. Right, so, Adorno's got a critique of popular culture, and especially the commodification of popular culture, its mass production, and the false hope, think false Maria, of everyone being an individual in the same way, pseudo-individuality and so on. And sci-fi often science fiction films often seem to be dealing with exactly these problems without saying they are. If you think of some of the popular TV shows on science fiction, like Star Trek, or Battlestar Galactica, but Star Trek mainly, it's curious that our audiences might be well into science fiction because it frees them to think of fantastic new worlds and space adventure. But so often the space adventure involves the military in space and regimentation. The Federation of Star Trek, for example, are pretty. It's a hierarchical world, even though they say that they've given up money and the sort of pseudo-communism. But there's a hierarchy they follow. It's a fascist system in space, basically, the Federation, and so many others. Gattaca, great film, Gattaca. Watch it. As if Gattaca is a film where only perfect people, the perfect individuals can leave the world to go to colonize other planets and so on. And you have to be a perfect specimen to qualify to win a flight off world, because obviously leaving the planet is a good thing. I guess the planet is dying, we want to leave, and going off world means you have to be a success, like in NASA, a perfect specimen for the astronaut, as if Uma Thurman, who plays one of the characters in the film, might not be perfect. That's just the premise of the film is problematic. But anyway, the Federation I'm talking about is supposed to be future society in space, and they point out that it's slightly evolved from Earth society. They've achieved warp drive, which means they've got faster than light travel, and it's a military hierarchy in space. And so the question of alienation and individuation is something to think about in space. Can you be an individual in the Federation? Nearly always the stories of the Federation of Star Trek are when individualism bumps up against the order of Starfleet, right? And it's curious, because then the heroes of the TV show, like Kirk or Seven of Nine or figures like Captain Janeway, are the ones that have transgressed that order, had a bit of personality. Or See, so that's an interesting thing about Star Trek, I guess. It used to be that Star Trek was about boldly going forward. Captain Kirk was out exploring new worlds, right? Boldly going where no one had gone before to explore new worlds. But by the time they'd had then the next series, or the next show, The New Generation with Captain Picard, who was just like a classic French character and disciplinarian with some culture. And then they were still boldly going, but not quite so. They weren't. It wasn't where no man had ever been before, where no humans, and they corrected it. By the time they got to, then they had Deep Space Nine, which wasn't going anywhere. It was just a space station, so it was stuck in space. And next they had Voyager. They weren't boldly going anywhere. They were trying desperately to get home. So it had become quite anxiety-producing. Alienation again, and anxiety. Anyway, this is true of some of the classic sci-fis as well. Alien, all the Alien films are about your anxiety, that there might be a bug inside you, hopes and fears, War of the Worlds, being attacked by aliens. That's classic. And then Battlestar Galactica, which I talked about and written about. I gave you that to read, the article with Laura King. They are basically, they have aspirations. They want to be human, the Cylons, the skin jobs anyway. They want to be human, but they're alienated and they're machines. And the question of whether they have gods, which just somehow makes you human, is a part of the story. I don't know if anyone has gone back and looked at the Battlestar Galactica, the second series, the reboot, but it was super popular. About, oh my God, it must be 20 years ago now, 15 years ago. Massively successful reboot of a very clunky 70s series that came out originally as a movie, quickly put together to challenge or to cash in on, in a way, the success of the Star Wars movie by George Lucas, which of course is again a parable about militarism in space, or worse, fascism. A fascist dictatorship takes hold of the Federation, and of course the opposition to that, the rebellion, are also led by fascists, basically clerical. A cult, the Jedi cult. They're basically a clerical theocracy. Anyway, Galactica was again anxieties about issues on our planet and our lives, our alienation, projected into a space opera, a story in space. And this is why we wrote the 18th Brumaire of Gaius Baltar. It's relying on theory of the past, basically Marx's text on why the revolution of 1848 failed in France, the 18th Brumaire of Louis Bonaparte, but updating that thinking to look at colonialism in space, or at least the way in which science fiction is a kind of a way of talking about things like utopia, the idea of utopia. We can't make it here on an island, like some fiction was about Brave New World or Treasure Island, Robinson, all these islands. You go to an island and build. Robinson wants to build an island, right? He gets trapped on an island for a long time, but then when he escapes, he wants to go back in volume 2. And set up a colony of a perfect island. Well, so also leaving this planet and going to another one to found the perfect society is part of the premise of science fiction. But that's nearly always also bumping into problems and anxieties, because in Galactica, it's the robots, basically, that are the problem, robots that are built by humans. Turns out also built by a cult or the father of a cult member in Caprica, we find out about all that. But the robots have done what robots nearly always do in sci-fi. They've rebelled against their creators. That's why Asimov wrote the first law of robotics and so on. Robots shall never harm humans. The robots rebel, and the robots are somehow flawed. It's not flawed humans, it's flawed robots, right? But really, when you do any kind of psychoanalysis, you must think, actually, that's about the flaws in humans that are being projected, alienated onto these other beings. And isn't that the nature of contemporary capital, that capital has sort of somehow got a life of its own. It's become mechanized and machine-like, and the general intellect is stored elsewhere than in our heads. And not only in books now, it's on the web, and it has a life of its own. I mean, some dimensions of sci-fi are really interesting to thinking about knowledge. Think of Ready Player One, which has basically a library of all knowledge, which no one even consults anymore. It's running into disuse. Or even The Time Machine, where the repository of knowledge are these rings that spin. The books have decayed, but the rings spin and they tell a story, but nobody's paying attention to their knowledge. Or even the new series of Asimov's Foundation, which has been on screen in just the last couple of months. Its foundation was set up originally as the empire was in decline, and Harry Seldon and Foundation would build a archive of all knowledge so that humans would still wouldn't lose everything when the empire collapses. It goes the way of the pyramids, so to speak. Of course, it turns out not to have been so important, but by the by. The general intellect there is talked about in sci-fi in ways that, you can only wish that people would talk about it in the real world, on Earth, about like actual, what do we do with knowledge and science? We have this huge repository of knowledge now, but it's being privatized by companies, and it's not all accessible anymore to humans. Right? And that's interesting because that discussion I don't see happening. There's a real contradiction between the idea of the university, knowledge should be open and free, and the interests of the research wings of companies, where they really don't want anyone else to get their knowledge. It's proprietary. Here's the contradiction of plagiarism, right? Plagiarism is contradictory because you want to say, acknowledge that someone produced that knowledge themselves, acknowledge them, and they own it, and so on. And yet you should be able to quote it, and it should be yours as well. So the thing about plagiarism is recognizing someone else's work, they've done the work, and still being able to use it. Whereas that leads soon to the idea that that knowledge belongs to someone you should acknowledge. It leads very soon to property and ownership, and excluding that knowledge from some people's use. Anyway, that's also there in many of the sci-fi stories. And sometimes it's funny. Marvin, the 4 billion-year-old robot who knows everything and is bored. If you had a brain the size of a planet, you'd be bored too, he says. In Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. So many great films to see. Galactica, of course, is war in space. It's the aliens who are actually robots versus the humans who are on the run and being wiped out, basically. In fact, the Cylons seem the better humans. And that's really something, because, isn't it that the idea of producing a thinking robot is to build well, here's the question, and it's the question that Ballard and so many writers have addressed explicitly, do machines, is there any sense in the question of machines wanting to be human? Like, do they have wants and desires, or should we build machines as humans, or should they aspire to be something better than that? That'll be whether it's a fighting machine or a work machine, right? Here we go. We try to build different electronic things. In the film Blade Runner, for example, Blade Runner, for all the stuff about the Blade Runner, and basically it's a cop show, right? Deckard is maybe a Blade Runner himself and is hunting down for robots that have returned to Earth, and they're about to expire because they have a use-by date. That's the way in which they dealt with that anxiety of robots experiencing too much and becoming better humans as they expire after 4 years. And that's tragic, you know, because Pris, the pleasure model. It's a tragedy when she passes. And also Rutger Hauser, who's the star of the show, really, more than Deckard. Anyway, the point of, or the premise at the start of Blade Runner is that the owner of the corporation, Aegis, is producing perfect animals that are indistinguishable from the original, because the originals have been destroyed. Obviously, that's the premise. The Earth has been destroyed by capitalism. All that's left is a kind of people living up on the top of these huge pyramid-type buildings using technology, and then a mass of people living in the lowest level in what looks like a Asian street scene. There's Asian street food, and there's different communities running around, neon lit. It's like a bit like some parts of Tokyo, Ginza or somewhere like that, in Tokyo. That hierarchy, but the reproduction of perfect animals, because animals have been exterminated, become extinct, is interesting. And the question that's been raised by Ballard and people like that is whether or not the animal or the android, actually, the machine that becomes a replica of the human, why do they have human desire? I guess, and Blade Runner is originally, the book for Blade Runner was called "Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep?" Right? Do androids, do robots, when they dream, do they dream of sheep like humans do, or do they dream of electric sheep? But the question is, why do they even aspire to be human? The name Blade Runner is actually borrowed from a William Burroughs novel, I think, or at least there's a William Burroughs novel called Blade Runner that's a kind of film script. It's interesting. But it was originally "Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep?" And the problematic there is, if you make robots that have desire, will those desires be human? Like, why? And this is not even sci-fi. This. Well, I guess it's sci-fi, but this can go back even further. Think back to Jonathan Swift in Gulliver's Gulliver's Travels, where he writes about not Gulliver in Lilliput, but the next place that Gulliver goes to, or I think maybe the third place Gulliver goes to, the land of the homonyms, who are horses basically, and they're much more sophisticated than human beings, and their god is, of course, a horse. Makes sense. You would make your god in your own image. as humans have. Why would the God that made the planet and made the universe and all that, if someone did, why would it take human form? That just seems inefficient. So there's question of what desires robots might have. Will they dream of a human God? No. In Battlestar Galactica, they kind of have God, the one true God, right? And it really is, it's Christianity, basically. Although they some variations, different symbols, but and they're terrorists, which is an interesting anxiety about contemporary time. Battlestar Galactica was a hit, I think, really because it was about so many things that were happening at the time in everyday politics. For example, the occupation of Iraq and waterboarding, torture by the US military. All these things were shown as happening in between in space, and the anxiety that there might be terrorists amongst us. We have to find them out. They look like us now. This is the anxiety of Battlestar Galactica. True as well is there's a dimension of sci-fi that's future thinking, but it's really nostalgic. It's looking backwards, like Terra Nova and Revolution. Terra Nova is about going back in time or to a different planet that is a start again civilization, as well with 100 or so on, because you've ruined the planet, so you want to start again. Right? Or in Revolution, this is a very interesting one. Suddenly there's an event that happens that destroys all electricity. And people have to begin again with candles and with, when there's no automobiles, there's no, most weapons have become electric and don't work anymore. Helicopter gunships, there's all the, and of course the first person to find a way to run electrics again is the one that comes to dominate. Or even nostalgia for a time before technology is often at stake, like the utopian idea of science fiction somehow denies the very thing that gets you into space in the first place, which is technology. Sometimes science fiction is obsessed with technology. For example, the only popular culture that seems to happen in Star Wars is trading different bits of robot. They also have bars where they have kind of jazz, but not much else in terms of popular culture, but trading and car races, high-tech land speeder races. But the nostalgia thing for a time before technological advance and technological crisis is really strong. In Generation, it's a society that decided to live without technology. The Fifth Element, it goes back to ancient Egypt. In a film called Silent Running, that's really interesting. The world has got to a state where the environment is in such dire straits that they build these spaceships with greenhouse pods and little robots that look after the greenhouse pods, and eventually they're called back to Earth, but one of them is released out into the universe. A self-sufficient jungle environment, basically a garden in space under a big dome. And the idea that the Earth is exhausted, we need to go and start somewhere again, is in so many of these films. And that's an interesting take, because a lot of these films were made before talking about climate change and Greta and all of that became really standard. So Deckard in Blade Runner is reading a magazine called Farming on the Moon at the start. There's always the wish, the desire to escape the overcrowding and pollution of the planet. And in sci-fi, you can name it pollution. instead of having to find a word like climate change or environmental crisis, right? Pollution actually names the problem. Right? The top 100 corporations in the world are do produce 70% of all pollution, right? So it's capitalism polluting. That's not climate change. Climate change is the effect, not the cause. We name it climate change so we don't have to actually blame someone here on Earth. Or we put it into space where you can blame the evil Aegis Corporation or the evil machines or Skynet, right, in Terminator. This is an interesting function of sci-fi, is that it can critique militarism by putting militarism in space. It can critique pollution, but it's an escape from pollution. Or it can, but almost any anxiety that we have can be discussed in sci-fi, even though they're real world anxieties. Right? And and it can be body problems as well. Think of the body snatchers and Alien. Annette Kuhn's written interestingly on this. That should say she points to the proliferation of the photographic body appropriation in sci-fi film. Think of how in Blade Runner, Deckard examines photographs in order to identify that Rachel, his girlfriend, may be an android because she has the same memories as him. Does that make her? I mean, he's clearly turns out to be an android as well. He has the same memories, or is he the initial one from which they've cloned, constructed Rachel and her memories? And are they brother and sister? Because they end up in a relationship, so it's an incest. I mean, and the incest theme is strong in sci-fi. Think of Princess Leia and Luke. They almost, Luke wants to get it on with his sister. Very weird. And so many other examples of inappropriate sex in space. There are moments where it's all about sex. Barbarella, for example, which is a good 60s sex romp in space. But the body as well in space is interesting because you can experiment with the body, with body design and changes in the body, the robot body, but also the body modified. You can have mods in sci-fi, so bodily modifications of different kinds traded in the market. Think of killjoys. Or you have disabilities that are erased in space. For example, Geordi towards the New Generation in Star Trek, he's a black guy who's an engineer, but he's also blind, but he has a band that allows him to see. So he's had implants which restore his sight. Right? So he was doubly. The racial politics of that are a bit interesting because they've erased the racial politics, but they made him disabled and then cured him with technology. And there's a whole dimension of interesting image representation, digitization, and prejudice, I guess. The prejudice against the disabled, and race. And then the whole field of the hot body, right? The avian sex machine, Daryl Hannah playing Pris in Blade Runner, or Annalee Cowell, played by Winona Ryder, who's also, it turns out to be a robot, or the hot TX in Terminator: Rise of the Machine. So many hybrid Hotbot, Cylon, the beautiful Cylon, the 6. Well, I thought the 8 actually was yeah, anyway. These bodies, but also alien births, strange hybrid mix of right. The first of all, the alien using the human body as like a spider might use, or a moth. A spider might use a moth as a future food for for its young. Plant the egg inside something that the host can then become and be consumed by creature, or an alien be birthed out of the chest, and probably one of the more horrific scenes of sci-fi. Let alone the hybrid technologies, drones and kill planes and so on. But here's the whole set of problems. I think it's that basically sci-fi is projecting problems into space. The androids want to be human. Data, in Star Trek, Data, right? The machine character, he becomes a professor in Cambridge. He's a kind of cheesy character. Data is a point of interest character for kids, mostly. But the False Maria, or C-3PO, Roy Batty, who says it can be hard meeting your maker when he meets the guy who created him and then crushes him. The whole thing about robots wanting to be human is a sort of America coming to terms with its history of slavery, or not coming to terms with it. It treated Black Africans that it rounded up in alien space and brought to work as slaves in the same way that robots are to be treated. And eventually the robots rebel in the way that slaves probably should have or did. And this causes a unexamined, unbelievable crisis. I mean, a lot of sci-fi is really trying to talk about and deal with these kind of issues, like racism. Famously, Gene Roddenberry, too many examples of racial problems. Jabba the Hutt, for example. The Jabba the Hutt, the villain in Star Wars, is basically an Islamic, problematic Islam. He lives in a cave. I mean, this is long before Obama. He's Orientalist. He has a girl in chains, right? Princess Leia. He eats little tidbits and there's like dates and as a snack. I mean, he is an Oriental despot. But it was also Star Trek, in fact, that had some say in combating racism in America. It was the first ever kiss between a black and a white actor on American TV. Was on Star Trek, the kiss between Uhuru, the communications officer, and Captain Kirk. So important was this, the first on-screen kiss, first on-screen interracial kiss. Like, it broke so many barriers. We seem to think it's probably insignificant now, but it's not. It's still a thing. I mean, admittedly, they were on a planet and they were addled by drugs, so that's why they kissed. There was this strange drug experience they had on this planet, which is why they kissed. They didn't actually choose to do this, so it could be dismissed. But it was so important that Martin Luther King even came to visit Gene Roddenberry on the set to acknowledge that this was an important breakthrough in America. And yet at the same time, projecting our problems, sci-fi is so much about the war machine. Right? How do you keep control of technology that gets out of control, and how do you kill the enemy? Westworld, so many examples. Or anti-technology anxiety. That's the part of I guess, Galactica and Brazil, Metropolis. 12 Monkeys is a good example, because there's another slightly a different fold there. The anxiety is not that the mechanical technology got out of control, but biological technology did. Basically, 12 Monkeys is the story of trying to go back to stop the plague that destroyed humanity. That one is something, because usually the destruction it's rare that the destruction, you can track when biological hazards became a part of the sci-fi future, and that's really relevant and interesting for us today, given what's happening to the planet. And I would be very surprised if there aren't a slew of new films coming which deal with the pandemic. And anxieties about what will happen after the pandemic, or after the revolution, after the crisis, after the destruction, in The 100 or Soylent Green or even Rocky Horror. It turns out that because we'll be desperate, and 12 Monkeys as well, because we'll be desperate for survival, it's more than likely that we're going to have to eat others. And yeah, Planet of the Apes, good comment. Absolutely, that's the anxiety, isn't it? Technology changes the apes, so knowledge goes wrong. Right? Science, mechanics goes wrong. Science, biology goes wrong. And with the monkeys, it's various reasons why the monkeys evolved suddenly, but it's basically those programs where they were teaching monkeys to talk. So anthropology of a kind. And the other anxiety is whether or not we're alone or not. And there being more potential planets than there are to count in the universe, we probably not. And there's the anxiety. Have we survived this far only because no one's found us yet? Or are we about to find that gateway to the future? Think of all the gateway films as well. The Expanse, but also what's the one where the gateway is pyramids? I forget. There are dozens with time travel gateways and so on. And also the anxiety about what we're doing to the planet. Climate change, but climate change, as I said, called pollution, but also climate change as the destruction of the planet. And famously, Fred Jameson said, it's easier to imagine the end of the world than it is to imagine the end of capitalism and do something about it. Although, in Vietnam, maybe it is still possible to imagine the end of capitalism. See capitalism as only a step along the way to something better. But for many in the planet, Jameson is right. They most find it easier to imagine the end of the world. And so many sci-fi films are that. Or the only way that we survive the end of the world is some kind of jingoistic Americanism. The unity against diversity, Independence Day. Come on, let's right. And in so many of these films where aliens destroy the world and then America leads the rebellion to triumph and return fire and so on, they all destroy. The Eiffel Tower gets destroyed a lot. Quite often the Statue of Liberty survives, right? Think of Planet of the Apes, the first one. Or American icons survive, but the Eiffel Tower or the Sydney Harbour Bridge or the Taj Mahal, these other places are quite often destroyed. aliens really seem to love America. That's why they visit there so often, and so on. I mean, even the contagion happens there more than elsewhere. The rest of the world just cheers on the fight. Or ET visits suburban America. Of all the places where an alien is likely to land on the planet, it turns out to be suburban Vermont, or wherever it was. It was actually outside Los Angeles, wasn't it? So, but still. Yeah. So I said that I'd been on a spaceship. Did anyone believe me? I have been on a spaceship. Me, myself, like so many Americans that have been on spaceships. Only the spaceship that I was on was an exhibition spaceship. It was a model of the Eagle that landed on the moon, that was toured in the 70s, early 70s, soon after 69, toured museums around the world, and they created one for the Melbourne Art Museum. And as kids at school, we were first of all, we watched the moon landing on TV. If it really happened, it might have been faked. Oh, I don't know about that. Well, I do know, I'm pretty sure. We watched it on TV, and then just a couple of months later, we were able to go and visit the actual landing. No, not the actual. A model of the NASA had built not the prototype. What do you call that? Another a backup model. A backup, not model. Backup. A second version of the lunar landing module, and they toured that as something that school kids could go and visit, and we could sit inside in groups of, I think it was 6 or 8 of us. Fantastic. Never forgotten. That's the dimension of where sci-fi was reinforced as about real world politics, because that was a propaganda coup for the US, and it reinforced. They got the kids early. They got them to be pro space race, pro America in space, and astronauts, and Neil Armstrong. What a great man! And all that. Turns out he's not so great after all. Much later, I stayed on a houseboat in Srinagar in India, and it was called the New Neil Armstrong. So it had been named after Neil Armstrong, but it had a letter there from Neil Armstrong, and it said, "Dear Mr. Yusuf Chopra, houseboat owner, please do not send Professor Armstrong any more letters. He's busy, he's just signed NASA," or something like that. And that was framed. Right? So Armstrong wouldn't even acknowledge that somebody had named their boat after him. Bit tragic. Anyway, yeah, I've been on a spaceship. I visited the spaceship. It was in a museum and so on. But yeah, I'm not like those Americans who really believe that they've been kidnapped by aliens. Phenomenon, or that have seen UFOs, and you should check out. Do a search for a global map of UFO sightings, and you'll find, I can maybe show it later, you'll find it's the majority of the sightings are in the USA. Some are in the east coast of Australia as well. But, funny how they don't want to visit Vietnam. Let me just check if that thing is, maybe I can show you it. Hang on. So where's the world map? We need to show it through this. Okay, so this is my search page, and here it is. No, that didn't work. Okay, that did work. So you see here the well, you can see the picture. I can't make it bigger. You see where the sightings of UFOs are on a world map. Predominantly in the US, and then Europe, Western Europe, a little bit in the east coast of Australia, but pretty much nowhere else. So what is it? The aliens only like what? Starbucks? No, they're all over the world. They only like hamburgers. They're all over the world as well. It's very unusual, but also revealing that it's about the propaganda, the global propaganda of sci-fi, and the majority of the world are not subject to this future thinking in the same way. And the anxieties I've been talking about today are not on the radar, though there are. This is coming as global mass culture is generalized, and Donna will be right to have some concerns about that. It's worth looking at also just the makeup in the sightings, that the majority of sightings around the metropolitan centers. Of course, that's where more people are, so that makes sense. It's, there's a better map of world sightings, but yeah, majority in the US, very few in Asia, a few in Delhi you see across there, and I don't see a little bit in Ho Chi Minh City there. Where's Ho Chi Minh City? No, not much at all. I wonder if we can get a version of this. Sightings of UFOs, world map, Asia map. Not really. This one. So some in India. New map shows UFO sightings throughout the world from 1933 to the present day. And yes, there are some hot spots all across India and less in China, not as subject to US and British propaganda as India, but also includes Vietnam. This is Ho Chi Minh, Canto, and Ho Chi Minh City, and Da Nang there, Hanoi a little, but not, I suppose bits of China have some as well, interestingly. But compared to Europe, it's the English and the Germans that love to see UFOs. So revealing, so interesting. I mean, strange way to digitize people's fantasies. Wow, Illinois, that's in a city. Mostly they're very urban, so they're mostly like downtown as well, the aliens. I mean, of course, aliens are going to be sophisticated, aren't they? They're going to go to the big cities. They're not going to go to some rural backwater where they can't get all the joys of, really? How silly. Anyway, that'll do for now, I guess. I was going to talk a little bit about alien intelligence, artificial intelligence, and so on, but there, you know, we are aware of all that. The only thing is about AI that is, it fits the narrative I've just been telling. The law of robotics from Asimov was basically if artificial intelligence, or if robots aspire with artificial intelligence to be more human than human, there should also be more rational and more reasonable than humans. And so it stands to reason that they would then have to intervene to stop humans from hurting themselves. humans are so irrational that rationality implies that you need to save them from themselves, right? This is problematic. To intervene, before they destroy themselves, to preemptively protect them from themselves, which is the premise of so much sci-fi, actually. And this is the logical extension of the police action that created the whole Vietnam scenario for America, right? To protect humans from the scourge of choosing to become communists. And that was the strategic Hamlet program, up chip blunt. And now the algorithm of artificial intelligence is starting to make choices for us for our own good. What we should read, what we should buy, who we should like, what we should think, you know, and this commodity system is now starting to have its own better reason and work out ways in which to make sure it places us, the appendage to its machine, in the right frame of mind to make sure we're feeling well, taking the right vitamins, buying the right books, reading the right things, self-help books and so on, and being the right kind of citizen for the new world order coming. I've been watching this old, 5-year-old TV show called Halt and Catch Fire. And it's very interesting that the only critique of the whole development of World Wide Web and so on is the guy that commits suicide. It's almost like any questioning of this new drive towards digitization of everything in mass culture has to be wiped out, made an example of, and rejected. Very anxiety-inducing scenario that we find ourselves in. But no doubt, films will also think through that for us. Here's the problem, that the machines are starting to think for us. Our general intellect is being alienated, and the algorithms deciding so many things for us. That's the beginning of artificial intelligence, right? The algorithm. It decides who your most regular friends are, who's good for you, who's bad for you, what things you should buy, what things you should see, and how regimented that is, because it works on the principle of, well, you like this, you'll probably like that. Keeping things the same rather than introducing anything that's different or challenging or makes you think. All right. Thanks for that. We'll have some discussion now. The chat and the questionnaire thing is open.